I'm on.
Oh, he's on.
He's on. He's just listening to us rant.
I know. Obviously, he didn't get through to us yesterday, but okay.
It's a slow process.
Yes, I know.
The Meister cometh. That's what List students used to say when he walked into the room.
Oh.
The Meister cometh.
Okay, let's hear some music. Let's hear some music, Rabbi.
Rambam music.
There we go.
Yeah, Rambam music. I wonder what his opinion was of music. I wonder if he had a platonic view of music, or he liked it. Who knows?
It's funny. There must be a place where he talks about it, right?
You would think.
Yeah. I mean, it's a part of the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, which means it has to have profound significance. You'd think he'd talk about it, and that'll be cool to see where that was. Now we're going back to here.
I just Googled Rambam on music, and here's what came up. Just a tap. The tour cites a responsum of the Rambam in which he adopts an even stricter stand, prohibiting even vocal music unaccompanied by instruments and not sung in the context of wine drinking. But I don't know what that could be. He's stricter during, it's out of context. It's out of context. Okay.
So there is a prohibition after it's one of the things to remember the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, not to drink wine in the presence of music. So perhaps that's what he's talking about. So like to go to a place, that's a whole issue about
is this only the Beis Hamikdash or anywhere?
After the destruction.
It's post the destruction.
Post Churban, yeah, got it. Yeah.
Just now that we've done it, looked at it for a second. I'll look it up for a second. This is just this guy, Rav. Listening to Music in a Post-Churban World by Rabbi Gidon Rothstein. Part of what I value about this series is the exposure we gain to a range of halachos we might otherwise not realize or encounter. So Rabbi Vosner, in his Responsa Shevet Levi, takes up an issue I had never heard of until I arrived in Israel for a post-high school year of learning. Even there, I didn't encounter it in my own learning. A second-year fellow that year of Nati Helfgott delivered a chabur on the topic, when and whether we may listen to music. Rav Wosner starts with the Rambam's Laws of Fasts 5:14, which records some of the ways Chazal told us to mark the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash in our everyday lives. One of those is a decree, in the Rambam's view, banning the use of musical instruments, in which he explicitly includes all which make a sound of song. We also may not sing while drinking wine, based on Yeshayahu 24:9, Bashir lo yishtu yayin, with song they did not drink wine. The end of the paragraph's mention of a cappella music told Rav Wosner the earlier reference to all which makes a sound of song, including music made with non-traditional instruments. The Rambam also referred to producing and hearing, which taught Rav Wosner we may not hear music regardless of whether we had anything to do with producing it. Taken simply, the rule against music puts radio into question. Shiurim hametzuyanim ba'alacha permitted listening to news and business despite moments of music played between parts of broadcast. He thought halacha defined an item by how we generally use it. For radios in these kinds of observant homes, the majority use was not musical. Once defined as a non-musical instrument, we can use the radio to use the music. As support, he mentioned Orach Chaim, which says we cash utensils for Pesach, turn them from up. Rav Wosner disagrees, and in doing so betrays some of the cultural assumptions which underlay his reasoning. He writes, even one who airs and permits a radio in his house for business purposes and to hear the news may not listen to the musical parts. Before we get back to the music, let's not glide over his reaction of a radio, even for news and business ideas. All right.
So according to the Rambam, any instrumental music
is forbidden after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash.
Okay, so all of this obviously changed.
Well, he didn't change it, but
the halakha changed.
Well, that depends who you talk to, because I also had this experience that he's describing. When I went to Israel, my first year in yeshiva, I was playing Mordechai ben a cassette at that time of Mordechai ben David singing, and the mashgiach, who is also a halachic figure, Reb Yoel Schwartz, came in and he said, "It's forbidden. It's forbidden," and I thought he thought that I was listening to what they call goyish music. But he wasn't. He was saying it was forbidden to listen to music because of the Churban, because of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So he was paskening that way. Rav Wosner, who was one of the important poskim in Israel, apparently holds this.
But doesn't it seem like the vast majority of people, I mean, it's common practice among Am Yisrael. We play instruments. I mean, Simchas Torah.
No, that is not music, that's dancing, but it's certainly singing if he holds singing. But even for weddings and stuff, that they agree that for weddings and stuff, it would be permitted. The question is for any other reason.
We once took Rabbi Wolf.
Yeah, we took Rabbi Wolf and his wife, and they came with us to hear a piano recital. They didn't see
Right. The Magen Avram was very strict about it. The Mishnah Brura objected to music at meals. He would seem to prohibit a restaurant with a piano player, for example. But there are more lenient views as well. Ramosha Feinstein sees no problem with live music. Those for whom it is not constant, and sees the Rambam as a stringent outlier on this issue. As his way, he recommended being stringent if possible, but notes reliable, lenient views. He also thinks the permissibility of music for mitzvah purposes includes more than weddings. He was unsure whether it extended to fundraising dinners, since the dinner is a means to an end, not a mitzvah itself. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef thinks the added layer of radio makes music more permissible. Obviously, he limits this to holy songs. But the halachic innovation is that he thinks recorded music is not included in this aspect of mourning for destruction. At any occasion of mitzvah joy, he thinks we're allowed to have even live music. His list of such occasions includes bris milah, pidyon haben, bar mitzvahs, etc. Rav Vosner holds that holy music is permitted for sure at weddings. But apparently he also felt that it might be permitted to rate to if you're sad. But there's even a question if you can learn to play an instrument, according to Vosner. So so you have Moshe Feinstein. Obviously, people are relying on Moshe Feinstein and Ovadia Yosef, which are very important. But I can tell you, when I was in Israel, it was shocking. The post game that felt that you shouldn't be listening to any music. It was a shocking thing. But there's also a separate thing about listening to music when you drink wine, which I don't know if Ramosha is, I don't know about what Ramosha would say about that. Because again, they quote a pasuk from Yeshayahu about that one. So, okay. So obviously a topic that could use a lot more research. So we're in mitzvah 30, and mitzvah 30 is a big one. He, being God, prohibited us from following in the ways of the idolaters and from behaving in accordance to their practices. And even with their clothing and with their gatherings in their assemblies. And that is, he may be exalted, saying, you shall not follow the practices of the nations. And in the explanation, it appears, I only said those that were established for them from their forefathers. The language of the Sifra, halachic midrash, and in their statutes you shall not walk, in their customs, those things that are established for them, such as theaters and circuses. So it sounds like so far, I'm just taking this for 1 second because it's about my next class. Sorry about this. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so this is called Chukas Hagoyim, going in the ways of the nations or the Gentiles. He is specifically connecting it to idolaters, but he includes things like going to theaters and circuses. These were types of assemblies in which they would gather for worship of the images. So, I guess originally, there would be some kind of idolatrous worship associated with theater and circus. Rabbi Meir says these are the ways of the Amorites which the sages enumerated. I once had one of those audio courses, this was years ago, about the Greek playwrights. Initially, these plays were performed at large gatherings that were days devoted to Greek gods. So I'm assuming that this is the kind of thing he was talking about. So there'd be a festival for the worship of a Greek god, and then they'd actually have one of these plays performed at the festival. So even if somebody was going to see the play, it was at a festival for a Greek god. I don't know if that continued to be true. I'm assuming it did in Roman times, and but I don't know how long that kind of thing continued to be the case. I'm assuming even in early Christianity, there were plays that would be associated with, there were those passion plays that were done at Easter. So that would be another example of theater that is connected to what many would consider a pagan holiday or festival. Again, not everybody, but many consider it. Rabbi Meir says, these are the ways of the Amorites, which the sages enumerated. Rabbi Yehuda says that you not round your face, not cultivate locks, and not wear the hair komi. So there were certain hairstyles that were worn. The Rambam makes this connected to idolatry, that these were hairstyles of the priests or monks that were associated with idolatry. So to him, this is still very tied to idolatry. As to whether all poskim think of it as having to be connected to idolatry, it doesn't seem so, but the Rambam does. Anyone who does one of these things is liable for lashes. The prohibition of this content was repeated in other places, and that is saying, take heed unto yourself, lest you are drawn in after them, lest you resemble them and do their deeds, and it becomes a stumbling block that you should not say, since they are going out with Telusin, I will go out with Telusin. That's a type of weapon of the Persians. You already know the language of the prophet, and all such as are clothed in foreign garments. That's tzfanya. This is all to distance ourselves from them and to revile all their practices, even their clothes. The regulations of this commandment have been explained in the 6th chapter of Shabbos. See Parshas Kedoshim, Mishnah Torah, foreign worship and customs of the nations. So we're just going to look at the Rambam in his codes on this subject. right there. Okay. We may not follow the statutes of the idolaters or resemble them in their style of dress, coiffure, or the like. In Leviticus 20:23, it states, so this is Parshas Kedoshim, it says, do not follow the statutes of the nations that I'm driving before you. And then earlier it says, do not follow their statutes. That might be the end of Achremos. Do not follow their statutes. And it says, be careful lest you inquire after them. All these verses share a single theme. They warn us not to try to resemble the Gentiles. Instead, the Jews should be separate from them and distinct in their dress, in their deeds, as they are in their ideals and character traits. So think about that list for a second. You shouldn't dress like them. You shouldn't act like them. Also, you should not share their ideals or their character traits. In this context, it states, I have separated you from the nations to be mine. Thus, one may not wear a garment which is unique to them or grow the tresses of our hair as they do. We may not shave our heads from the sides and leave hair in the center as they do. I think of that as that Friar Tuck haircut that was in a lot of the old Robin Hood movies. This seems to be what he's describing here. This is called a blorit. In modern Hebrew, a blorit is where you leave, it's usually a haircut of a boy where they leave a lot of hair in the front. They call it a blorit. We may not shave the hair on the front of our faces from ear to ear and leave a growth in the back of our heads as they do. I'm wondering if that's similar to what the Hare Krishna people had, like that ponytail coming out. We may not build temples in order that many people may enter as they do. Whoever performs one of the above or deed of this nature is liable for lashes. When a Jew is cutting an idolater's hair, he must stop when he approaches within 3 pringabris of the flow. So a Jew is not even allowed to cut a Gentile's hair in that way. A Jew who has an important position in a Gentile kingdom and must seat before their kings and would be embarrassed if he did not resemble them, is granted permission to wear clothes which resemble theirs and shave the hair on the face as they do. So this is one of those things we've talked about. This it's a status called karov l'malchus. This is also a subject that would be sort of interesting to define. There are people throughout history who have been famously karov l'malchus, going all the way back to Yosef. But there are figures even during the Middle Ages and even up to modern times that seem to have this status. The chief rabbi of England seems to have this status which allows him, for instance, to enter a church as an IT, as he was for the wedding of Harry and what's her name, the princess? Not Harry. Oh, maybe it was Harry and Meghan, but it was also whatever their names are. So he ended up at royal weddings, both Jonathan Sacks and Chief Rabbi Mervis. And the explanation for why they were allowed to be in the church while a service was going on is that they were karov l'malchus, and they have this kind of position which gives them certain exemptions from other matters which other Jews are supposed to go. This is one of them, that they're allowed to dress as Gentiles and cut their hair like Gentiles. So that seems to be his thing there. And now we're just gonna go for a second. Just try this as an overview. A second. Right. Please help me understand why Jews continue to identify themselves publicly with all the violence toward Jews for thousands of years. Shouldn't we stop making ourselves a target? Thank you for raising the important topic. It's actually an interesting question, whether or not Jews are obligated to dress differently from their non-Jewish neighbors. Beginning with the earliest well-known source on this topic, the Midrash writes that Jewish people were doomed from Egypt because, among other merits, this is really, these pop-ups are the Midrash writes that Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt because, among other merits, they did not change their names, their language, or their dress. It mentions only, note the earliest version of this Midrash mentions only names and language and not dress, but several later commentators and compilations of the Midrash mention clothes as well. It would thus seem that we must dress distinctly from non-Jews so that we do not intermingle with them and follow their ways. In practice, however, most authorities do not obligate us to dress specifically differently from non-Jews. There is a general Torah obligation not to follow in the ways of the Gentiles. In their ways you shall not follow. This would extend to such practices as imitating non-Jewish dress or hairstyles. However, according to the accepted ruling, it only applies to dress which somehow relates to idolatry or immorality, or is otherwise nonsensical. Thus, we may not follow the immoral dressing habits of non-Jews, but it's fine to wear their sensible and respectable dress. It should be noted that even Hasidim, who today dress very differently from others, are actually just wearing the accepted dress of the upper class of Eastern Europe of a few centuries ago. That has become prevalent dress in such circles, but at least historically speaking, there is actually nothing especially Jewish about it. Although the accepted practice is that Jews may wear the respectable and non-idolatrous clothes of the Gentiles throughout history, their appearance was always somewhat distinct. Maimonides, the laws of Avodah Zarah, writes as follows: we may not follow the accepted practice of the idolaters, we may not resemble them in our clothes and our hairstyle, or the like, as it is stated, should not follow in the ways of the nation. This warns us not to resemble them. Rather, the Jew should be distinct from them and recognizable in his dress, his other deeds, just as he is distinct from them in his beliefs and understanding. Thus, although there's no obligation to dress in an unusually weird or antagonizing manner, it was understood that Jews will stand out to some degree and not simply blend in with their neighbors. This, as Maimonides explains, is part of the intention of the obligation not to follow in the ways of the nations. This has been further reinforced by such practices as wearing four-corner garments with tzitzis, not shaving with a razor, the universal custom of men to always cover their heads, and women, as well as the law of married women to cover their hair. In modern times, in particular, religious Jews often stand out for their more modest dress. In addition, there were many times in history when non-Jewish authorities would obligate Jews to wear distinctive badge or garment, such as the peculiar conical hats of the Middle Ages, sometimes called the Jewish hat, to set them apart from the Gentiles. The concept of Jews wearing a yellow star or the like long predated the Nazis. Apart from all of this, Jews would generally dwell separately from their Jewish neighbors, also often imposed by the state, forming their own social community and structures. Thus, although Jews throughout history would generally not purposely make themselves glaringly distinct from their neighbors, they would maintain some separation and would always be identifiably Jewish. Although the sages obligate us to maintain positive relations with our fellow citizens, such as giving charity to non-Jews, observing the laws of the land, and praying for the welfare of the state, we do not hide our identity. In fact, a person is permitted to disguise himself as a non-Jew in order to save himself from a dangerous situation, as many did during the Holocaust. If a person is asked if he's Jewish or not, he's not allowed to deny his Jewishness, as that would appear a renunciation of his faith. That would be an interesting halacha to further. He is saying here, and this is based on the Shulchan Aruch Yoredea 1572, even though you're hiding to save yourself from a dangerous situation, if somebody asks you if you're Jewish, you're not allowed to deny your Jewishness.
But aren't you obligated also to save your life?
You would think so. We have to see that 157 too. It's important to see this issue in a bigger light. The Jewish mission to the world is to be a light unto the nations. This is accomplished by teaching the world of the existence of God through our ethical and spiritual ways, as opposed to only attempt to convince them, which is bound to backfire. Thus, our goal must be not to hide ourselves away and devote ourselves to God in private, not letting anyone know we exist and are Jewish. Rather, we proudly stand up for our beliefs, letting the world know who we are and what we stand for, and the extent to which devotion to God and mankind sanctifies a human being. As a result, it is important that people know we're Jewish. This, of course, doesn't mean antagonize our neighbor through bizarre behavior or being visibly Jewish when it might be physically dangerous. But generally speaking, we should not hide our Jewishness. We should act in a way that sanctifies God's name, enabling people to see how noble the servants of God are. Again, we might have to hide our Jewishness in specific countries, neighborhoods, or times of day because of danger, but we shouldn't do so just because we're embarrassed to look different and stand out. Only when our personal safety is at risk. Our mission to the world obligates us to clearly stand for something and to let the world know just how glorious that something is. So that's the Aisha Torah, Rabbi David Rosenfeld, on the question of being conspicuously Jewish. So he does mention that. I think that's interesting. First of all, he mentions the
it seems strange because
here, and the leniencies he is suggesting based on the Ramah to the Shulchan Aruch are that it cannot be connected to idolatry or immorality or nonsensical. I wonder what that means. So the Rambam's seems to be the one who ties it so specifically to idolatry. So they're writing that. So if you're wearing what they're calling sensible clothing, modest clothing, even though it's the style of the Gentile world, it would be okay. But let's say you were wearing clothing that is the religious clothing. It's modeled after the religious clothing of idolaters. So that would be forbidden. Trying to think of anybody who does that nowadays. It is funny, like when you see the clothing of certain rabbis and cantors, there was a similarity. The way they wore those robes, etc. There was a kind of similarity to the clothing of priests. I wonder if anybody ever brought that up at that time. Even the houses of worship were synagogues were very similar to churches. The clothing of the clerics became similar. The style of worship, I'm sure that was brought up. But what you can do and what you couldn't do. Okay, we'll talk more about this. I look forward to doing that tomorrow. I'm very, very grateful to be able to learn with you guys. Don't forget God. Don't forget God in all your discussions about what's going on. I noticed even very religious sources have not really brought God into this. God is a part of it. Okay, be well.